Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Chris, and this is Business by the Books.
Welcome to the Business by the Books podcast, where we believe that leaders are readers. So if you are not reading, you are not leading. This is episode 14, and we are covering the book The Innovators by Walter Isaacson, and this was published in 2014. Cool.
Good book.
And yeah. And this book is more of a history book, and it dives more into
this would fall in our category of biographies and histories.
Yes, yeah.
So sometimes books like that, they're fun to read. I think I've said before, I think at least 1-2 years you ought to read one biography. This is like a bunch of biographies compressed into one. But sometimes when you read a biography, you may be inspired. But sometimes in terms of what we're doing, sometimes it's a little bit harder to pull stuff out.
Yeah.
But this is an extremely well-written book. I mean, Walter Isaacson, he's a great author. And we were talking to me, is that we have three books of his of my favorite. So he's probably written more books than any author of this entire series that we'll
be covering. Yeah, we're going to be covering this one, and then we'll also be covering his book, Steve Jobs, which is his most famous book. And then we'll also be covering Benjamin Franklin, which he wrote in the 90s, I believe.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
So one of the things that it does, and if you get the book, which I encourage you to do, I think it'd be a good book because it relates to technology, which we all do, is in the first couple of pages, he has this real neat timeline that goes back to, I think it may be the 1700s. And basically mathematics is the essence of innovation, at least in terms of kind of the Western world. And I would probably say worldwide. A lot of the technologies that we have today, if you didn't have mathematics and science and those kind of things, you wouldn't have those things. And so the subtitle for the book is How a Group of Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. And you just think about, I mean, the fact that you're watching this, it's because of somebody invented it. It's because of technology. And there's so many things that we take for granted. I mean, you just think about when you get up in the morning, you probably don't have an alarm clock anymore, right? My iPhone wakes me up. And the first thing I do is after I slumber and go in the bathroom is I look, has anybody texted me? I check email, I check the weather, and everything is on my phone, right? And then I get in the car, and I'm on an Audible thing right now, so I'm listening to books driving in, or I wind up talking to someone on the phone. My whole life, and yours is even more than mine, technology drives everything we do. And then I get to the office and I check email, and we're running tests and all these things. So much of our life is influenced by technology in ways that we just don't even think about. Now, the real test, though, is like here in Houston, like when a hurricane comes and we lose electricity. And I mean, you just really find out how dependent we are, or the internet in the house goes down and everybody's freaking out.
Oh, it's the worst.
Right, it's the worst. It's like, oh no, how did you people survive?
The internet gets slow at 2 a.m. here, and it's just a really big pain in the butt, and I can't take it. So that's really why I'm getting married and moving out.
Exactly.
So I don't have to
take
deal
this.
with this.
All you people on your phones all hours of the night. So I think we're going to talk about some different people in this, but I think this book, like no other book I've ever read, really does a great job building this framework on how each technology builds on the next technology. And so as we kind of go through this podcast, we'll kind of explore some of these key people and what they did. And innovation is the essence of an advancing society. And when I think about innovation, it means that you have new ideas. And one of the challenges when you come out with new ideas is, are people going to accept those? And so the book talks a little bit about that. And one of the books that we're going to talk about here in a couple of episodes talks about the innovator's dilemma and how you can take innovative ideas, and you've always got a group of people that are slow adopters, but then you got about 2.5% of the population that are the innovators, and they're ones that come up with ideas. And so there's this constant frustration. And when you go back to the 5 Voices, which was our first official podcast in Business by the Book series, is that the creative is the innovator, and they can live very frustrated lives because they see things that other people don't.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, and I know, so you've mentioned that there's multiple people in this book. So how many people and who are they covered in this book?
So one of the things I'll just kind of center on this, and we'll kind of drill back, is you always ask me what's my favorite chapter or quote, and so I'm a child of the '80s, so I was born in 1968, and so when I was in high school, the big thing was video games. And so we actually filmed this up in our game room, and I'm looking at, we got like Buck Hunter and H2 Overdrive, and then we have 3 games that have all these classics 80s arcades like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Galaga, yeah. And so when we got all these, I thought y'all would all be excited, and Aaron's over there playing on our high-tech, big projection screen, playing Fortnite and stuff. And it's just kind of funny looking at those graphics versus what was really cool in the 80s. So we've got all these video games, and if I was in high school and I'd had one of these games in our house, I would have been the coolest kid in school.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was one of those things, we'd go, go on Saturday night, and a lot of times we'd go out on dates, and we'd drop our dates off, and then we'd meet at Games Galore, like at 11 o'clock at night, we'd go play video games. That's the ultimate geek. And you'd walk in this place, and there were kids that they didn't do the dates; they had been there all night. So there's a special set of those kids, and so they'd have their quarters, and they'd line their quarters up, and so you'd be playing, and then when you finish the quarters, they'd jump in, and it was just this. Our whole world was focused on that, and so it really changed the way that we spent our time, and the generations, your grandparents, they didn't have access to all that stuff. So I kind of made some notes about, to me, some of the key things that were innovation in our world. And one of the first things that really jumped out, and how I love World War II. If I had to go back in time, I would have been a P-51 or a Corsair fighter pilot.
Yep.
But the mathematics and the early stages of computer were the code breaking. And so there's Alan Turing. There's a great story about him. There's a great movie that we've
with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
It's a great story about these brilliant. And once again, I go back to mathematics. And if you're listening to this and you got kids, we need humans, and especially being here in the United States, we need Americans who love math. And so, my encouragement is get your kids excited about math, because everything that's in this book is based on somebody who was good at mathematics.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing. And, in some regards, it helped us win the war, was the ability to do the code breaking. And then, once you got into that, then you heard the early computers. And, you think about a computer today, like a laptop taking up this kind of space. These computers took up entire buildings. And, we just don't have an appreciation for that. And then one of the things that we definitely don't have an appreciation for is the transistor, right? Nobody even talks about transistors today. But one of the things when I was a kid was a transistor radio was a really big deal. It was a portable radio. And the electronic side of things in the 1960s began to really change the way people were able to do things, the mobility. And then in the mid-60s, there was a law called Moore's Law, and Gordon Moore's the one that came up with it. It was 1965, which is the year your grandfather graduated from A&M. And in Moore's Law, which Intel's kind of lived by, was that microchips would double their power each year. So you just think about the graph, and you just think about how fast things process today.
Yeah.
And I think about when I was at A&M, I got a 286 computer in 1989, and the first before that was 8088, and I had a 40 megabyte hard drive.
Oh my god!
That was it.
This whole podcast is going to be about 40 megabytes.
Yeah.
So your computer could only have one episode of our podcast.
And you had like a monitor that could play or color have 16 colors. And before that, a couple years before that, all you got was like a monochrome green monitor, okay? So that was like these 80s video games, they might have had 256 colors, but you didn't have the, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of colors that we have now.
Oh yeah, I have a MacBook. It's just the all of the beautiful graphics. There's a reason why I got the MacBook, because it's so beautiful just to look at. It's so visually appealing. Yeah.
So just think about that. Think about when I was your age and I had that was a new computer. That was a 286. And the funny thing, Granddaddy paid about $2,000 for that computer. So the amazing thing, and people don't think about the price of computers has not changed.
Yeah,
I mean,
that is crazy.
It's mind-boggling because today at $2,000, I mean, my laptop that I use at work is probably less than $2,000, but the computing power. So anyway, the technology, the creative destruction that takes place in this space is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So then Intel started in '68, and the microprocessor, the microchip, is really what revolutionized. I mean, almost everything that we have. I mean, your camera, your computer, and there's probably a microchip in this. I mean, everything's got a microchip. And so what happened was you had the ability to start getting things very, very small, and you could process all this information. And then as a mechanical engineer, you have to learn how to manage the heat, and they learn how to do that. And then you get into Atari, and Nolan Bushnell, I'm probably saying this wrong, he started Atari in 1972. Steve Jobs worked for him as a kid.
Yeah. He didn't like it very much, but because they weren't innovative enough for him.
Yeah, but Nolan Bushnell's got if you go on NPR, they have a podcast series called How I Built This, and he's on there. And I've listened to Mark Cuban's. I mean, they have a bunch of famous people, but I love that podcast because he talks about how they got started, and they got like a big order from Sears at Christmas time, and he went back and he was all excited because he had sold it, and all the people back working with him were like, "You got to be kidding me! We got to make this many thousands."
Yeah.
And then you fast forward to where we are today, and so one of the last things that it had on his timeline was in 2011, IBM's Watson won Jeopardy. And so, that's been almost 10 years ago. And today, a big push, and even in the pipeline industry, is machine learning and artificial intelligence. So how do you take a terabyte of data and do you process that down, just like we do as human beings? How do you take all that information and make decisions? And that's where the next evolution, I mean, it's almost like the Terminator, right? That the computers are going to get to the point where they can process this information and they can make decisions more accurately and quicker than we can as humans.
Yeah, one of my favorite TV shows is on Netflix called Person of Interest, and it's this whole principle of this computer that is connected to it's like a Big Brother type thing. Yeah. But this computer is connected to every single camera. At least I think in New York City, I think is specifically where it's located, and it sees everything. It sees all of these situations, then there's like a secret agent kind of guy that's recruited by the man who operates and owns the computer, and they're able to, with the help of this technology, infiltrate systems and crimes before they happen.
Oh, wow.
And it's this whole principle of
there's a movie called Minority Report that's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's able to predict bad things before they happen.
Yeah, and so it's it's that principle. So that's really interesting, and just the capabilities of technology. So that's one of the things, like I remember just sitting in my I think it was freshman year of high school, and sitting in a geography class, and my teacher was talking about technology and first world countries and stuff, picking up her iPhone and saying, I have more technology in my iPhone than what man went to the moon with, right? So, and that's just a weird concept. It puts it in perspective, doesn't it? It's a really weird concept, thinking like, oh, well, it also makes me feel very like inferior, like, wow, I literally have the ability to, that my technology could get me onto the moon somehow.
Well, and the thing too, Ashley, is it changes the way that we think and act, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate indication of influence, is that our the way we get up, the way we go to bed, the decisions that we make. Like you were talking about, that you got an alert, here in Harris County that, Harris County is encouraging you to stay home because of COVID. And if you do have to go out, only kind of for necessary. And if you do, to wear a mask. I mean, they have the ability to communicate with every person in Houston with that kind of vehicle. And you think about 10 years ago, it's like you never could have envisioned something like that. So it has a way, I think most of it's good, but there's also some negative, you can't unplug. And I think about, I love to work, but with these little babies, it's really hard to get away. We even laugh when we go to Disney World. It's like, I'm in line at Pirates of the Caribbean or something, and I'm checking texts and emails. And it's just, technology was supposed to make our lives better. And I think in some sense it has, but it was also supposed to make it so we wouldn't have to work as much. And, that was kind of predates you, but that hadn't been the case at all.
We work so much more.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first started, when I graduated from A&M, we didn't have email. Right? I mean, if somebody wanted to send you something, they sent you a letter. Fax was relatively new, even in 93. So just, the ability that we have to communicate, I think has been the real game changer for us as a society.
Yeah. So within the book, who are the innovators? Does it talk about specific people?
Yeah, I mean, it talks about Steve Jobs. It talks about like Andy Grove, and they started Intel in 1968.
Oh, okay.
And what I really, after I read this, and I think one of the guys that I used to work with, he had listened to something on NPR and they were talking about this book, and he said, hey, I think you'd really enjoy it. And then after I read this book, I read the Intel Trinity, which talked about the history of the microprocessor and the guys that started Intel. And what it really gave me an appreciation for, Ashley, is that there were key individuals that if you pulled them out, it would have had a major transformation on our society. If the guys at Intel hadn't had the intellectual horsepower at that particular time, it might have been 5 more years before something happened. So, one of the things that Walter does a really good job is he helps you understand the framework of time, and that certain things have to happen, and then the person comes along at exactly the right time, and that's a critical key for success. But one of the things that really inspired me, I mean, I consider, you hate to say I'm an innovator, but I think I tend to be kind of innovative, and I know that because I tend to think about things differently. So I'm either crazy, okay, which may be a little bit of it, but I tend to see things differently. And the fun thing about having a business is like, hey, this is where I think we need to go, and so as a team we move toward that. Yeah. But a book like this inspires me that you need the innovators to be constantly coming up with new ideas, because if they stop innovating as a society, we're in trouble. And in some regards, I mean, things like COVID and the low price of oil, like here in Houston, innovators, it's a discouraging time, right? It's hard enough during good times to get ideas adopted and things funded, those kind of things. But then you put an economic crisis on it, and it's just like going running, putting weights around your ankles. You feel lethargic and slowed down in that process.
Yeah, well, and it kind of ties into the Unleashing the Innovators, which we covered in episode 3, with this idea of coupling people who have the resources and the people who have the ideas, the innovators, and enabling them to accomplish that. Yeah. So it's just thinking about, like with Steve Jobs, if he had so many right moments that led up to him being able to be successful, and of course he was obviously a huge
and we'll talk about that in his book. But another thing, sometimes innovators, you remember the successes that they have. Like Thomas Edison, he wasn't a big part of the story because this was more on the digital revolution. But like Edison, even on the light bulb, he would try things hundreds and thousands of times and to find different ways for them not to work. But an innovator keeps innovating and keeps working toward that point. Another thing I really liked about this book, and I think regardless of what part of society you're in or what your role is, it's inspiring to read stories about men and women who really worked hard, and then there was success that came because of that hard work and being at the right place at the right time. And one of the things I wrote down is like every well-written history book, The Innovators helps us understand that advances occur incrementally. And as Granddad used to say, it's the area under the curve that counts. The greatest innovations occur when we have a group who have a grasp on where we've been and where we are going. And, the great example, that's the merger of the computer and the internet. We hadn't really talked a whole lot about that. That kind of came from ARPANET. And it was just a way to kind of connect people who were doing kind of research. And then, by the time, I think about the time you were born in the late 90s, the internet began to really get some momentum, and people started building websites. And then, that's where this digital revolution over the past 20 years is. It's just made things accessible for so many people. And like I think about, if you want to find any information on anything, you go to your phone and you go to a search engine, and at your fingertips. Now, I'll be honest with you, as someone who does a lot of public speaking and teaching, you better have your facts correct, because if you get a number off, there's somebody on the back row that says, actually, that was 1998 and not 1997. Yep. So it's forced a higher level of credibility when we're presenting things and facts. Now, there's always misinformation on the internet, but I think for the most part, there's a lot of checks and balances that hopefully would keep that. Now, one of the dark sides of this, and we even talked about about this with some of the work that Walter had done, is that it's the ability to manipulate social media. And I think that's a dangerous thing, that if you have a group of people that want to have a certain idea, if they have enough momentum, that their ideas become more influential than another group's. And I think it should be a level playing field. So that's something we're going to have to grasp with. And I think certainly within your adult life, y'all are going to have to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as a society and politically, just all of the arguments and the discussion that's occurring about this topic of, we have this incredible gift of technology that people, because of just all of the incredible advancements and opportunities that we've created, because of that, we've had this incredible gift of technology, and now we're at a place where people have an opportunity to either use it or misuse it, and that's been the way with anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But
even with fire, right? Caveman fire.
Exactly. Yeah, but this has a potential to completely revolutionize and change entire ways of thinking and ways of living
in a very rapid short period of time. Very quickly. You're able to disseminate information.
Yeah, it's just interesting thinking about oh my gosh, like 2008, in the midst of when Obama got elected, in the midst of the recession, like all of that stuff, and how much has changed. The
real estate crash.
With all the societal changes and all of that. But then moving forward, not only as society and all of that change, technology has changed and advanced so much. So it's weird thinking about, okay, we're in the middle of a recession right now because of crazy events and things happening. So where are we going to be 10, 15 years from now? And
and the hard part is you can't even predict it.
You can't predict it now. There's no way.
10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, you could look at trends and you say, this is where things are going. But like you look at the stock market, it's this huge V, and it's not years, it's months. It goes down, almost weeks, it goes down, and then it comes right back up.
Yeah.
And when you started in January, nobody could have predicted something like that would happen.
Yeah, it makes it that much harder. It makes it that much harder to predict anything, to plan anything.
So we can thank innovation for that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, innovation, for making life more complicated. But at the same time, of course.
But once you get the momentum started,
you
cannot stop it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just no way.
Yeah, so it's like putting a genie back in the bottle. Exactly. You can't do it. So
you got to feed the beast.
Sweet. Well, any final thoughts on this book and any challenges to our readers?
Yeah, so kind of the final thought in what I wrote was, so much of success in life, business, and technology is built upon the ability of people to collaborate, so to work together. And on page 476, it says, the future might belong to people who can best partner and collaborate with computers.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Computers.
Yeah. So it goes back to that artificial intelligence. So if you have processes, and I'll give you an example. I'm obviously in the pipeline industry, and one of the big pushes that we have with these inline inspection technologies, they generate tremendous amounts of data. So if you can take all that data and you can use artificial intelligence to say, okay, this is a dent, this is a corrosion, this is a crack, this is a bend, this is some kind of, the pipeline's moved because of maybe some kind of geohazard activity. If you can begin to train a process and a framework for that data as it's fed in, and then it allows you to make decisions very, very quickly with information that as human beings we just can't do that. It's the collaboration of people working together, but collaborating with the computers to do that. And that's going to be the ultimate power. And you can see almost every element of society, we're going to get to a point where we're going to be able to do that, which is good, and part of it's scary too.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see. Well, and just thinking about the medical industry as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like. Yeah.
So, woo, crazy.
Lots of opportunities.
Yes, lots of opportunities, lots of opportunities to capitalize. Make some money.
Build business.
Build the business. Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to reach out to us, if you end up reading this book or any of the other books that we bring to you and present, ones that he has read, not me, you can find out more about those at businessbythebooks.com. Reach out to us at businessbythebookspodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram at businessbythebooks. Just look up Business by the Books and you will find us. You want to close us out?
I do.
Perfect.
Leaders are readers, and if you're not reading, you're not leading.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to everything there is out there, and we will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.
Bye.